Oh, okay. My name is Kathy Bernstein,
We've known each other for years.
and today is Tuesday, October 12th, 2004. Today, as part of our celebration of 350 years of Jewish life in America, we're visiting with Dr. Alfred Bader, and we have a lot of questions for Dr. Bader today. He has given me a whole CV and a book that he wrote, and so on and so forth. But Alfred, I'd like very much if you would begin by telling the audience about your namesake, your father. And I'd like to kind of go back there and talk about that, your early beginnings.
My father's name was Alfred Bader. He was, I'm afraid, a gambler. I don't know whether he was murdered or committed suicide. Of course, I didn't know him, and I know very little about him. I was adopted by his sister, who loved him, spoke of him as an angel, but people aren't angels.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother, by adoption, was as close to an angel as you can get.
Your mother?
My mother by adoption,
Mm-hmm.
my father's sister.
Mm-hmm. So was there an uncle?
He had died 2 years earlier. She was a widow.
Uh-huh.
She was 50.
I see. And did she have other children?
No.
But you have a sister, Marion.
That's right. An older sister who was brought up by my biological mother.
Did you see your sister?
As a boy, I saw her very occasionally. Later on, I visited her quite often in England. She
Uh-huh.
married an Englishman.
I see. Is she living today?
No,
Uh-huh.
she died 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I had no idea. Let's talk a little bit about your childhood. Your aunt took you in as an infant, then, in other words.
That's right.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your upbringing.
Well, I speak of her as Mutterli, my mother by adoption.
Mm-hmm.
When she adopted me, was a very wealthy woman. Her late husband had been a multimillionaire. But then came the inflation in Austria, and gradually over the years, she lost everything. By the time I was 13 or 14, there was very little. I became a stamp dealer, buying and selling stamps and using the money to buy food. And Mutterli was sent to Theresienstadt, to Terezin, and died there on November 23rd, 1942.
You were sent away.
I was on the Kindertransport.
Mm-hmm.
Kindertransport were children, mostly Jewish, of Jewish background, who were taken into England and Scotland. The British government, after Kristallnacht, gave 10,000 visa for children between 12 and 16. I was on the first Kindertransport from Vienna. Coming to England, of the 10,000 kids, almost half were taken in by Quakers, the other half by Jewish families.
And
This is why I think so highly of the Quakers.
you were taken in by Quakers?
No.
No. Just because they did
No,
this?
but there were 17,000 Quakers in Britain and 300,000 Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And the Quakers never tried to convert our people. It's an amazing group of people. I try to say thank you by helping them.
Uh-huh. Good for you. Good for you. How long were you in England?
From the 12th of December 1938 until July the 9th, 1940.
Tell me about what your life was like then.
Ottilie had written to a distant relative in England, related to us through my father's mother, saying, "My son is coming as a kind to England, can you help?" And this very kindly lady, Mrs. Emanuel, found an old lady in Hove in Sussex who agreed to pay £1 and 1 shilling a week for my room and board, with a family that took me in that needed the money. Very kindly family, Jewish family. And first I went to a school, the East Hove Senior School for Boys, the poorest kind of school there was, but did quite well, and were then admitted to the Brighton Technical College until I was interned by the British.
Explain to us how that happened. Why that happened.
Well, in April and May of 1940, the Germans invaded Belgium and Holland and France, and the British got very worried. Here were some 60,000 so-called refugees in England.
Mm-hmm.
How many of them might be Nazi spies? And so Churchill said on May the 12th, 1940, collar the lot, all the men between 16 and 65. I had just turned 16.
Mm-hmm.
I was taken from a Sunday school at a synagogue in Brighton that Sunday morning, and then sent from a camp in England to a camp on the Isle of Man, and then as a prisoner of war to Canada. The Canadians had said that they would take prisoners of war, and so the British labeled us prisoners of war class 2 so that the Canadians would take us. We were put onto 5 boats. I'm not sure that the British kept track who was on which boat.
Mm-hmm.
2 boats went to Australia, 2 boats went to Canada, and 1 was sunk. I was on the boat to Canada.
Thank God. Unbelievable. So you're 16 years old?
Yep.
All right. How do you feel about the British people? Do you carry any grudges? And how do you feel about...
No, I feel the British are very fair, or they were at the time, a very fair, straightforward people. I loved being in Britain. Schooling in Britain was so different from schooling in Vienna.
In what way?
In Vienna, if a boy broke a window, say, playing soccer,
Mm-hmm.
and a teacher asked who broke it, nobody would own up to it. None of us did homework, except one, and everybody else copied.
Mm-hmm.
There was cheating all over, not stealing, not any rough stuff, but never owning up to what you have done, and certainly copying each other's homework. In England, the kids too were ill-behaved, but if somebody did something,
Mm-hmm.
and the teacher said, who did it, the kid would own up to it,
Mm-hmm.
and then he'd get
A caning or
A
whatever.
caning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Were the studies as rigorous in Britain as they were in Austria?
the
Were the studies as vigorous?
studies. Well, first of all, the school I went to was, as I said, the poorest kind of school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We had a French teacher whose accent was far worse than mine. I'd been taught French when I was a boy.
Uh-huh.
I didn't learn much, it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
But in Vienna, in the gymnasium,
Mm-hmm.
you had teachers from horrible to very good. I had a teacher in mathematics who was the worst kind.
Because
He was so incompetent.
I see.
I had a teacher in German who was absolutely superb. Very oddly, he was a Nazi. He was a member of the NSDAP, the Nazi party. And yet he treated the Jewish kids perfectly fairly. I visited him after the war, and he remembered me very clearly. He said, you know, Bobby, my name was Bobby in those days, we had thought of something very different of the Third Reich. I mean, he certainly was not an anti-Semite. He wanted a greater German Reich without knowing what was coming.
You know, it seems to me, sitting here and listening to this, it's amazing to me that you would, so many people won't even go to Germany because of the Holocaust. And here you were a victim of it. And you went back, and not only did you go back, you went back to see your old teacher who was a member of the Nazi Party. I find that so interesting.
May I answer? First of all, he was a very good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm perfect in German today, it's because of him. Also, I had a distant cousin who was a very good friend of the family, a very religious Catholic, who had been in the police under Schuschnigg, and he spent the entire war in Dachau. But he survived, and then came back and recovered his very large fortune. I remember his sister, wonderful woman, coming into the Jewish district in Vienna where I lived every Erev Shabbos with a big basket of sugar and margarine and chocolates to bring to Jewish families whom she knew. A very religious Catholic. There were decent Austrians, just not enough of them.
All right, you went to the technical school, you're in Canada now.
I remember the first night in Canada.
Tell about it.
The first evening. I was the youngest. And all the others were 3 to 20 years older. Mm-hmm. And the camp commandant called me in and said, how old are you? I said, I'm 16. Awfully young to have parachuted over England. I said, no, I didn't parachute, Major. I'm a Jew, I'm a refugee. I came to England in December 38. I don't believe you for a minute, but we don't like Jews either. Major Kip.
That's a nice beginning. I said, that's a nice beginning.
Well.
So there you are in Canada.
This is all in chapter 2 of the book.
It's possible, but then we could have read the book.
Yes.
We want to see your punam.
Okay.
And hear your own words, you know? That's the value of this. We want people to see you and your face. And so we're just going to go through this together, all right? And I'd like you to continue about your life in Canada and...
Well, in the camp, gradually it got better.
Mm-hmm.
At first, the camp commandant didn't believe we're Jews. The Orthodox Jews refused to work on Shabbos, and solitary confinement didn't help. And the commandant wrote a letter to the Jewish community in Montreal, which I saw later, saying, we have here a group of 273 young men who allege that they are Jews. Please send a member of your clergy to check this. Mm-hmm. And it was just before Tisha B'Av, and an old Rabbi Hirsch Cohen from Montreal came. And it took him 30 seconds to realize that we were Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And then gradually, conditions got better. At the beginning, we had no news of anything. We had no radio, we had no newspapers. When we came, we were surrounded by barbed wire and towers with machine guns. These people believed that we were Nazis. We had to leave our luggage in Quebec at the port, and when it arrived, it had all been forced open, and we just got empty suitcases. The contents were stolen by the soldiers. Occasionally, the wind blew in some newspapers. And naturally, we hoarded them and looked at them very carefully to see what is this country like. And one day there was an obituary that I read in the Montreal Gazette about a Mrs. Martin Wolfe dying, leaving her husband and her daughters. And this Martin Wolfe, the survivor, was the son of the very woman in England who had paid £1 and a shilling to look after me.
Oh my.
Beschert.
Yes,
I wrote to him. He didn't get the letter because the Canadian censors didn't let letters out that were not an answer.
Mm-hmm.
But then a Jewish social worker came in and questioned many of us. And I told her about this Martin Wolfe. And she said, he's a neighbor of mine. And he got me out of the camp. In the camp, I'd been 1 year and 4 months. I had the choice of either studying with very orthodox kids, Talmud only, or studying for the McGill entrance examinations. And I chose the McGill entrance exams. And we did exceedingly well in the June 41 McGill entrance exams held in the camp. No girls to distract us.
Mm-hmm.
Hard work, and we did well. The McGill authorities wondered whether there had been cheating going on.
Yeah.
And when we wanted to take the senior matriculation exams, they took us to an island in Montreal, St. Helens Island, and watched us very carefully there. And again, we did very well. And then, because of Martin Wolfe, I was one of the first to be released on November the 2nd, 1941.
Mm-hmm.
Then that was a Thursday. The next day, I applied to McGill, having done really very well. They had a Jewish quota, and they turned me down. And Martin Wolfe applied for me to Toronto, and they turned me down. Martin Wolfe has a daughter. She just celebrated her 90th birthday. She had gone to Queen's University. So she wrote to Queen's. Queen's accepted me, and I started there on the 15th of November, 1941.
And they are a beneficiary of yours ever since, aren't they?
Yes.
Why not? I wanted to ask you a question about your observance growing up with all that went on in your life. Was your adopted mother, what kind of Jewish home did you have? Did she light candles? Was this something that was done? How were you raised Jewishly?
She wasn't well educated Jewishly,
Mm-hmm.
a very convinced Jewess. She lit candles on Erev Shabbos. We didn't eat pork at home,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't get kosher meat.
Mm-hmm. Did you
I
eat
remember-
pork out?
No.
No.
First of all, we didn't eat out because we had no money.
Right.
I remember as a little boy standing with Mutterli and saying the Shema. My biological mother came occasionally and made a cross on my forehead and said to me, unless I became a Catholic, I would go to hell, which I didn't believe. She insisted to take me to the second Mass in the St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna to listen to the Mass for the damned Jews, then pointing out that a direct ancestor of hers, and therefore mine, was buried in that very cathedral. But I was a Jew, and luckily we had a wonderful family living above us who invited me very often on Erev Shabbos and every Seder. And I admired them very much indeed.
So you had no formal Jewish education as a young person?
Well, that isn't in the gymnasium. We had a professor of religion whom nobody listened to. We went to a Saturday afternoon children's service in a conservative synagogue nearby, where was actually bar mitzvah, saying the blessings, reading from the Torah.
So you learned?
I didn't. I just read the blessings.
I see.
Nothing else.
Oh.
When I then got into the internment camp,
I see.
the people said that's insufficient.
I see.
You have to go through bar mitzvah again. And then I read the whole Seder Shemini in the internment camp.
When did you what period of your life that you acquired so much knowledge about?
In the internment camp.
Really? Because, I mean, I've heard you in Shul give a Devar Torah, and I know you taught at Emmanuel, and
Yeah.
I mean, this you don't just pull out of your sleeve.
No. The education, even though I didn't opt
For the Talmud.
for the Talmud class, I had 1 month of studying one Masechta Makos of the Talmud. I thought that it would be better if I got the McGill exams, if I passed those, and it was better.
Yeah. All right. So you then went to York, and you studied what?
Went to Queens,
Queens, right? Queens, and studied what?
engineering chemistry.
And you graduated?
Well, I graduated, I got the medal in chemistry. 2 years earlier, I'd gotten a very good summer job with a paint company in Montreal. And they asked me to come the next summer, and then they asked me to join them as a chemist when I graduated. And in fact, the employment fellow at Queens called me in and said, how come you have the highest salary of any graduating engineer at Queens this year, $250 a month? How come? And I said, well, I'd worked at that company for 2 summers, and they liked what I did. It was a very lucky position because it was the end of the war. There had been enormous shortages in ingredients for paints, and vinyls had been invented. And I learned how to formulate vinyl finishes and went with the salesman to their customers. And we would ask, what would you like for a baking vinyl finish? And they would laugh and say, well, what I would like is one thing, what can you give me? No, what would you like? And they came up with baking schedules they would like. And I would go back and formulate 5 gallons of such a finish and bring it in the next day with a salesman. The salesmen were paid largely on commission, and they loved having me along.
And why not?
Sure. But after a year and a half, the president of the company called me in and said, Alfred, you've done so well to our sales, but you only have a bachelor's degree. I'd like to give you some money. I'd like to give you some money to get a PhD. And he did. And I got my PhD.
Did you work while you were getting it?
No.
No, you just went and studied.
Well, first of all, I got my PhD at Harvard. I had a teaching fellowship, and I had the $1,600 from Harry Thorpe.
Did you have to pay him back by working for him?
Well, when I
In other words, do you know what I mean?
I came to Harvard in September of 47, and I finished in the autumn of 49. And I was offered an academic position at the University of New Brunswick. And I wrote to Mr. Thorpe, and I said, I've been offered this position. May I take it? And he said, no. We have given you the money to stay with us. However, because our sales have gone up so nicely, Murphy Paint has been bought by Pittsburgh Plate Glass. And Pittsburgh Plate Glass tells me the only research we do is in Milwaukee. Therefore, I want you to go to Milwaukee. So here I am.
That's so interesting. You know, it's interesting because Primo Levi or Levy also was a paint chemist. That's so. It's interesting.
Right.
Very interesting.
He wrote much better than I do.
I don't know. I haven't read your book, and I'm slogging my way through one of the biographies. You moved to Milwaukee then, and that was your deal with Mr. Thorpe, and that was fair. So you went to work for Pittsburgh Paint and Glass. Did you know anybody here?
No.
And so when did you move here, and where did you live?
When I moved here in January of 1950, and the director of research at PPG had gotten me a room on Marshall Street, North Marshall, and it was a surprising work environment. Everybody was surprised that I came there because several people told me, you know, we have an absolute rule here on the near South Side. No blacks, no Jews. And yet we hired you. But I wasn't treated at all badly. I was treated very well.
You must have been a tough guy. You'd had a hard life already, starting from the time you were born.
Well, by that time, I'd met Isabel.
Okay, but you had to have a lot of layers for all the hurts.
Well,
So how long did you stay at Pittsburgh?
until the summer of 1954.
Okay, and then?
Well, I would still be, at 80 I wouldn't be, but I would have stayed with PPG until I retired if they hadn't decided to move to Pittsburgh. In 1954, PPG decided to move the research labs to Pennsylvania. And I'd gotten to like Milwaukee. I very much liked Milwaukee. Very nice Jewish community. I was teaching at Emmanuel. I'd gotten married. I like everything about the city.
Before we go any further, like with Aldrich, I wanted to ask you about Rabbi Shapiro. Had you met him at that time?
Oh, certainly.
I wonder if you could tell a little bit about what was it about Rabbi Shapiro that made him so special. I did not know him.
Rabbi Shapiro came here in, I believe, 1948. He was treated horribly.
He came from where? I know nothing about him, really.
I think from Indianapolis. His wife had been from the South. He joined Anshet Fad, which at the time was on 11th and Garfield. the congregation treated him horribly. They wanted to turn the congregation into a conservative congregation. I remember in those days, of course, the total income came from the selling of tickets for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And one day after Yom Kippur, the treasurer simply left with all the money, and we were, I'd by that time become a very loyal member of the congregation. But there were very good people in Milwaukee to help him. Arthur Levine, whom you might have known, Marvin Klitzner, whom you must have known, Max Cowell.
I did know.
We all became members, moved the congregation to 51st and Burleigh. We should have moved it to the east side, but we didn't. He was then with a congregation that appreciated him. He was a wonderful scholar. When I first joined, he would give one sermon, one Shabbos in Yiddish and one Shabbos in English. He was a very caring, good person. He had, of course, difficulty marrying me because of my Catholic mother. But that's another story. He was a great teacher. He was wonderful to study with. He was very learned and wonderfully kind.
Do you think that he never gained the recognition and appreciation within the community that he should have?
He did in time.
Did he?
But it took a very long time.
Did he live to see that?
Yes.
He did?
Yes.
I'm glad. I didn't know him, but people revere his memory. And
Oh, he's a wonderful, wonderful human being.
And Mrs.?
She moved, they both, of course, moved to Jerusalem.
Right.
He had a stroke. He
That's
died
right.
in Jerusalem.
Right.
His
That's right.
wife was, well, we have a class this evening on,
Lashon Hara.
yes.
Okay. We'll pass on that. Etta? Wasn't that her name, Etta?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You see some pictures in my book.
Okay, well, I'll have to look. All right, we're now ready for you to leave Pittsburgh Paint and Glass because they want you to move to Pittsburgh and you're married and you decide to stay here and do what?
Well, when I was a student at Harvard, it was very clear that the one company that had a monopoly in supplying research chemicals, Eastman Kodak, was doing a lousy job. They simply didn't care. They had a monopoly. They supplied 4,000 chemicals, and they did so poorly. And when I joined PPG, I talked to the director of research, who became a good friend, Howard Garrett. And I said, look, Howard, I've got a lab. I've got a lab assistant. I have a good deal of glassware. My work is going well. My work was making monomers. One of my patents that was owned, of course, by PPG sold for $1 million. In those days, $1 million was more than it is now. Why don't you let me make, say, 5 new compounds a week? We'd have 250 compounds a year. In 10 years, we'd have 2,500 compounds. And chemical division within PPG. And Howard said to me, Alfred, it won't fly. Nobody can compete with Kodak. But I loved making chemicals. And I had a good friend, a lawyer, Jack Eisendrath. And I said to Gerhard, Howard, would you mind if this lawyer friend of mine and I started a little company? He says, I don't care what you do in your own time. Just be sure it doesn't interfere with your work here. It never did. Jack and I put in $250 each. We tossed up for the name. I lost the toss. He had just been married to a very nice Quaker girl from Pennsylvania, Betty Aldrich, and so we called the company the Aldrich Chemical Company.
What was your pick?
My name is Bader.
Oh, you wanted to call it the Bader.
Doesn't matter. Anyway, Aldrich is better, very American, starts with A. We rented a garage on Farwell, $25 a month. First year the sales were $1,705. And as we paid no salaries, we made a profit of $20. Second year it went up to $5,400. Third year it was up to $15,000. And then PPG decided to move to Pittsburgh. I decided to quit and join Aldrich full-time, but we had no money. But through Sunday school, I'd gotten to know a wealthy Milwaukeean whom you probably know, Bill Kesselman. And Bill decided to buy 1/3 of Aldrich for $25,000. He would put in $5,000 up front and then $1,000 a month for 20 months. And we used the $5,000 to equip a small place, 1,000 square foot, on Booth Street near Capitol. After 7 months, Bill came to me and said, I want out. This company will never be worth $75,000 to justify my paying $25,000 for 1/3. At that point, of course, I was working 14 hours a day. Jack Eisendrath had his law practice. Each of us owned half. I didn't think that was fair. I had a very good friend, Harry Kovanok. Did you know Harry?
I know the name. I know the name.
He was really a lawyer's lawyer.
I think Elliot knew him, yeah.
And I went to Harry and I said, look, Harry, this isn't fair. Jack has helped immensely because we started doing all the paperwork in his office. Without Jack, there wouldn't be an Aldrich. But to have it now 50-50 isn't fair. And Harry worked out 3 alternatives. Either I sold my half to Jack for $3,000 and started the Bader Chemical Company, or I would buy Jack's half for $15,000, or I would buy 20% so that I would have 70% for $6,000. Jack didn't like any of these. He was truly angry at me and said, this is totally unfair. I don't like any of these, but finally accepted the $15,000. And then I was the sole owner of the company. A little while later, I met a wonderful lawyer, Marvin Klitzner. We became very good friends. He became a director of Aldrich. He helped in everything. I was the physical hand of Aldrich. He was the brains.
So when did you begin to really expand? When did you begin to really expand?
We expanded every year.
Every year.
I mean, this year our sales will be about $1,400,000. We merged with a very good biochemical company, Sigma, and it's now Sigma Aldrich.
Yeah.
chapter 12 and 13.
We're not reading that. When did you, I'm going to leave Aldrich for a minute because I do want to make sure we talk a little bit about your art. And when did that happen? You said you were a stamp collector as a child.
A stamp collector and maybe a stamp dealer.
Oh, okay, yes, right. You brought money home with your stamp. Were you a collector of other things before the art?
Our home was
Is that your
full
personality?
of paintings. And it didn't take me long to realize that they were lousy paintings. I didn't like them.
You didn't like them. Did you have any formal education in art?
No.
Ever, never?
No.
Mm-hmm. You just have a connoisseur's eye, a collector's eye, whatever.
Chapter 17.
You're not helping me at all, are you? I'm going to tell Isabel on you. when I
Okay, you
see
have the
her.
book.
I have it, but I'm not going to sit and read it now. I don't.
Isabel is chapter 6.
We're not going to talk about that.
Okay.
I'd like to just hear a little bit about the art. When did you buy your first painting?
Well,
And where was
I
it?
bought
Why?
my first drawing when I was 10. I bought my first painting.
Okay, your first drawing. What was it?
It was an old master drawing, an Italian drawing, and I bought for 10 shillings. I gave it years later to the Minneapolis Institute of Art because the director there identified what it was. Very good drawing. My first painting was a painting that a painter in the internment camp painted of me, and I paid $1 for it, and I sent it to Rabbi Karlebach in Brooklyn, hoping that he could send it to Mutterly as a Hanukkah present.
Mm-hmm.
But then the war started with Pearl Harbor, and I got the painting back, and just a few weeks ago, I gave it to my son Daniel.
You mean just now? You mean just a few weeks ago now?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's illustrated in the book.
oh,
My first $1 purchase.
your $1 purchase. When did you find out that your adopted mother was dead?
Well, not really confirmed until the end of the war.
And
But then we went to Terezin, and I looked at all the records, and I know the date she died. She and a sister of my grandmother together were taken from Vienna to Terezin in the summer of 42. My aunt Helene died in September and Mutterly in November.
were they killed or did they die of malady? You don't know.
Look, she was a woman in her 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt that she was killed,
Mm-hmm.
other than the circumstances
Mm-hmm.
in Terezin were so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't meet anybody who remembered her. I tried to visit the building where she lived in Terezin, but they have turned it into a home for Alzheimer's patients, and they wouldn't let me in.
Mm-hmm.
But what could I have found out?
Yeah, I don't. Probably nothing.
No. It's just she was an unbelievably kind and good woman.
Mm-hmm.
A real Austrian patriot, loved the Kaiser.
All right, we're going to go back to your art for a minute. When you were running Aldrich, and I know you had lots of people working for you, when did you begin to deal in art? I mean, really deal.
Well,
you know.
Marvin Klitzner and I started the Bader and Klitzner Enterprises, of which owns Alfred Bader Fine Arts.
Okay.
I have 4 jobs. One of them is being the president of Alfred Bader Fine Arts.
Mm-hmm.
It belongs 50% to David and Daniel Bader and 50% to Marvin's 19 grandchildren.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I worked very hard. My secretary was very concerned. My salary is only $42,000 a year. Would that be a cap for her salary? She found out pretty quickly that it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm very happy. This is one of my 4 jobs.
That's okay, I'm just watching, somebody just came in. Is that what you do full-time now?
Well, I've got 3 other jobs.
Okay, tell me what they are.
One is giving a lot of lectures and writing a lot of papers.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow I've been invited to talk to the museum in Columbus, Ohio, on the Rembrandt Research Project and the collector. I probably bought and sold more Rembrandts than any dealer alive. Then on Thursday I'll be giving a talk to the American Chemical Society on the history of Aldrich. And on Friday on a historical subject of a very famous and unknown Austrian chemist. Next week I'm invited to Moncton, New Brunswick, similarly to give lectures.
Mm-hmm.
And I write a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Then I invest in chemical companies. Recently, my good friend Joe Bernstein
Oh, yes.
started a company, Bader and Bernstein,
B&B.
and I still have old stationery because we had B&B before with cousins of yours, not Joe.
Which cousins?
Remember Ace Bernstein?
Of course.
Okay. And we invest in chemical companies.
Mm.
Those are my 3 jobs I really enjoy.
I see.
My 4th job is giving money away sensibly.
Mm-hmm.
That's difficult. I had 2 great pleasures this morning, but sometimes it's very hard.
And you see, you have grandchildren in town.
Yes,
And
3.
3, and you get to see them.
Sure, they live very close to us.
Uh-huh, I know.
And I have 3 grandchildren in Pennsylvania,
How old are those children?
from 1 to 10. Helena just became 10 3 days ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. You have a new baby out there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
David comes here on Yom Kippur.
I saw him.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I think, he did some davening or something, didn't
Well,
he?
he was reading Jonah.
Exactly, that's right, that's right. It's lovely. You belong to Lake Park Synagogue, and you're a supporter of Lubavitch, and how come you don't belong to Lubavitch?
You don't belong to Lubavitch, I don't think.
Well, you go
Or
daven.
something. But Joe Bernstein and I,
Mm-hmm.
gave $1 million last year to get them out of debt.
Yes, I understand.
And we gave money to Lake Park
Right.
to pay off the mortgage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you and Lynn, I think it was. Was Linny part of that as well?
This was Lorraine.
Yeah, I call her Linny.
I see.
But when did you stop having a day-to-day role at Aldrich?
Chapter 13, I was kicked out of the company.
Okay. Because?
I was accused of betting against the company.
What does that mean?
In 1991, in the summer of 91, my son Daniel said to me, Dad, you give money to Queens, you give stock, Sigma Aldrich stock to Queens every year, and they sell it immediately. But the stock keeps going up, it never goes down.
Mm-hmm.
It always goes up. Why don't you sell an option? I asked Marvin, is this kosher? Marvin said yes. Then I called the principal of Queens, and I said, my son has told me such and such. I would like to give you 10,000 shares. I can sell options for $2 a share, options at 45. You'll get the option money and the 45. If it goes down, you just get the 10,000 shares. The principal said, sounds like a good idea, go ahead. I did just that. And Tom Corey, the CEO, said, This is betting against the company. A director selling a call option. Tom Corey had just sold 10,000 shares at 42. I got 45 plus 2. It was 0.1% of my holdings. Obviously, it was an excuse. But I was kicked out, and so was Marvin.
When was that? 91, did you say?
It began in 91, but it was finalized in May of 92. But I've learned how to sell call options.
Okay.
And now, every year, I sell Sigma Aldrich call options. On Friday, if Sigma Aldrich stock hits 60, 40,000 shares will be taken away. If it hits 65, 200,000 shares will be taken away. It won't, I don't think. So I just pocket the call option money, and it's a very nice income. I'm wealthier having been kicked out of Sigma Aldrich, and much happier working with the people I love working with.
Good.
I have a very good gallery manager. I love working with Joe Bernstein.
And you've got your wife who,
She's the world's best wife.
she's darling. I love your wife.
She's much more than darling.
I like her very much.
It took me 9 days to propose to her. It took her 30 years to say yes.
Uh-huh. On that happy note, Alfred, I'm going to thank you for visiting with us today. It was nice of you to take the time, and we appreciate it. And I'll read the book, but it's much nicer to visit with you and hear your voice
Look,
and the nuances.
cut the soft side. Don't have.
Now that I'm keeping the book I'm going to get. But
There's something for. I'd like to order the.